Thank you again to everyone for joining us at the OMA's latest media briefing on important healthcare issues in the news. I'm Dr. Samantha Hill, President of the Ontario Medical Association. We represent more than 43,000 doctors and medical students across this province. We're here today on the week that marks both International Women's Day and the first ever Canadian Women's Physicians Day to both celebrate the contributions of female physicians, particularly during the pandemic, and to talk about the systemic issues. Women now account for 55.9% of medical students in Canada. 42% of physicians in Canada are women, and that percentage is higher amongst younger physicians. Yet, that is where the equality ends. There are still many gaps between men and women in our profession. Male physicians still make more money. They are more likely to go into higher paying specialties, while women are still steered specialties such as family medicine or psychiatry, which are considered to be family friendly. Male specialists are more likely to get referrals from their male colleagues, and male specialists who have patients that don't do well are less likely to be held to account. And they still hold more leadership and decision-making positions in medicine. Today, I have two esteemed colleagues with me to discuss the mounting evidence of a substantial gender pay gap among physicians, how some of the inequalities begin even before women become physicians while they are still in medical school, how the pandemic has disproportionately affected not just women physicians, but women throughout the workforce, and what we can do about it. I'd like to introduce Dr. Kimberly Lazare, an assistant professor in the Department of Family and Community Medicine at the University of Toronto, and a family physician at North York General Hospital, as well as Dr. Clover Hemans, a family physician in the Halton region outside of Toronto and co-chair of OMA Women. To start with, I'd like to start by discussing some of the evidence around the gender pay gap. And this includes a landmark study by the Ontario Medical Association, which was the first and the largest of its kind in Canada to estimate a gap amongst a large group of physicians in a wide range of specialties. We looked at the daily OHIP billings of more than 31,000 practicing physicians in Ontario in the 2017 fiscal year. On average, for each day worked, female physicians bill less than 87 cents for every dollar billed by men. That's a 13-cent difference. Those women would need to bill 15.6% more than their current average daily billings to close the gap. The gap was much larger before we adjusted for factors that people tend to assume are important, like years of experience and work outside business hours. We also found that there was substantial variation depending on the physician's area of specialty, geographic location, and whether they worked in private practice or a hospital setting. Our findings echoed those of others. A 2019 study by Dr. Nancy Baxter, who was then a colorectal surgeon at St. Michael's Hospital in Toronto, found that female surgeons in Ontario earned 24% less than their male counterparts for the same time spent in surgery. They quantified the gap as 15% as well, after adjusting for physician characteristics like specialty and years in practice. We are recommending interventions to address the substantial pay gap between male and female doctors that include modernizing the province's fee schedule and payment models and ensuring fairness in payment and fee increases across the specialties. Female physicians represent more than 40%, of all doctors in Ontario. And as we move towards equity in the representation of women, we must also move towards equity in compensation. We know that patient outcomes are improved by diversity amongst physicians, and it behooves us Nay, we are professionally obligated to ensure that we mitigate the systemic obstacles that are gender-based or even race-based to those who want to enter the profession. Among our recommendations are policies to encourage representation of female physicians in medical leadership positions, greater work towards pay equity across specialties, modernizing the belabored province's fee schedule and payment models, studying the issue of gender bias in referrals to specialists, and advocating for expanded parental leave benefits for both parents. With that, I'm going to turn this over to Dr. Lazar. Dr. Lazar, would you please start by outlining for us the evidence of a continuing gender gap between men and women physicians? Can you tell us what the data says?
Thank you, Dr. Hill, and thanks for having me speak today. The issue of the gender wage gap, as Dr. Hill spoke to, is really an issue of justice and equity, and it speaks to greater underlying inequities caused by broader societal structures and gender norms that begins really, in medical training and in early practice, which are pivotal times in the development of one's career. We're almost a year to the day since the World Health Organization declared COVID-19 a global pandemic, and over the past year, women have fallen back into traditional gender norms, much more so, traditional gender roles in the home, much more so than men. If we look at the literature, there's a lot that's been talked about with regards to the inequities that women face. So pre-pandemic, if we look at dual physician households, studies have shown that once physician parents have children, that there is no significant decrease in the number of hours worked for the male parent, about a 1.5 hour per week decrease. But for the female parent, they reduce their work by about 11 hours on average when the children are young. If we look at data from the pandemic, fewer women in academia published in 2020 compared to other years, indicating that their academic work and career advancement were placed on the back burner, secondary to tasks like overseeing virtual learning for their children. There's also been a substantial drop in the proportion of women first authors publishing from 36% in December of 2019 to 20% in April of 2020 at the peak of the first wave of the pandemic. So if you have reduced first author publications, grant applications, and academic productivity, that can also stall career advancement, and that can reduce to also further reduced pay inequities. But I think it's important to highlight that the pandemic has also changed the way we work, allowing more flexibility and inviting others into our home lives more so than ever before. Just for example, last week I sat in on a Zoom meeting from home with 6 or 7 other physician colleagues, and children interrupting the meeting was both common and welcome. And 2 of the male physicians took the meetings from their cars so they could drop their kids off at school. I think we must, women have been asking for flexibility in the way that we practice to allow for improved work-life integration for decades. And we finally have the beginnings of that. So we need to carry that forward post-pandemic to allow for further improved equity. If we look at the Canadian Medical Association 2018 Physician Health Survey, we know that pay inequity and slow career advancement lead to burnout and career dissatisfaction. So in the 2018 Canadian Medical Association National Physician Health Survey, they found that women physicians had a 43% increase in odds of having lower resilience compared to male physicians. Significantly more female physicians reported burnout, increased lifetime suicidal ideation, and depression compared to men. So to improve these inequities, we must help to support women in their careers to level the playing field when it comes to pay inequities and help them in their career advancement. Not specific to physicians, I'm just going to talk a little bit about parental leave just for a moment, because while we don't have so much data around changes that have occurred during the pandemic for physicians, Parental leave is another time in a female physician's life when they do take a break from their career. And we know that from the literature, evidence suggests that up to 6 months of paid parental leave can increase the participation of women in the labor force and reduce wage inequities. In a cross-sectional study in the US of 844 physician mothers, only half reported getting some funded parental leave, and most reported wanting more time off. Now, I know there are differences between the US and Canada in terms of how much time we get off, but we can extrapolate some of those findings to Canada. Physicians taking care of Ontarians are offered far less support for parental leave than the patients for which they care, and this really sends a strong message that parental support is not a priority. We need to further support women during this time, this pivotal time in their early career that does set the stage for their future, to offer them increased parental leave supports. And finally, while some of the qualities that women have are unfortunately contributors to the gender wage gap, we also must highlight how some of these important qualities that women have, different from men, must be celebrated and must be emphasized as we sort of advocate for equity. So studies have shown that having more women in health policy leadership enhances the provision of high quality patient care. Women physicians spend more time with patients and address more psychosocial issues, and patients of women physicians have higher levels of satisfaction, and they have reduced readmission and mortality rates after being discharged from hospital. We cannot make progress in this area with respect to gender equity without also capitalizing on and celebrating these contributions of women in medicine. And I know Dr. Hemans is going to be speaking in a moment just about her call to action, how we can start to make these changes and advocate for women and equity, not just in medicine, but in society in general to achieve these things.
Thank you so much, Dr. Lazar. That was incredibly informative, and obviously I'm interested in the topic, but it also resonates with both of my children. I took the 16 weeks and felt very conflicted as I came back to work, and it's an unfortunate position to be in, and it certainly does jeopardize our advancement and our capacity to play at the same field as the boys, as they say. So with that, I congratulate you again on your research on the gender pay gap. As we know, it's supported by the findings of the research study released last August by the OMA and by various other publications. We spoke earlier about the largest study of its type in Canada, where the OMA examined billings for all physicians and found that on average, female physicians bill less than 87 cents. It's vital that we talk about this gap and that we find ways to remedy it, because female physicians represent more than 40% of all the doctors in Ontario. And we really do need to find a way to celebrate, as you said, women and bring things together as opposed to making it a divisive argument. Dr. Hemans, you believe that talking alone will not change behavior. You have some ideas about specific actions women can take to advance the role of women in medicine. Would you please share your ideas with us now?
Thank you, Dr. Hill. I would be delighted to do so. So as you've heard, multiple barriers prevent women from advancing and realizing their fullest potential in medicine. Equal number of women and men in medical school does not equal gender equity in medicine. I do have 10 actionable steps we can take, and today we will look at the top 3 steps to stop the stall on the career advancement for women in medicine. Number 1, I'll get right to it. We must put women, especially Black, Indigenous, and people of color, at the table where decisions are made. Representation really does matter. We need more diversity and more women on search committees, especially when hiring physicians, physician leaders, medical educators, surgical specialists, and on boards of governance, where direction is made and policies are formed. Diverse representation on search committees leads to increased diversity in hiring and appointments. Number 2, we must continue the fight against what I refer to as pink pointing, where medical women are pointed towards specialties more suitable for their gender, are penalized when applying to areas such as surgical specialties, and are viewed as less if their working life collides with their role as a mother. Men are not viewed as less when this work-family dynamic occurs, and often have an implicit advantage through mentorship and informal relationships with senior male leaders in programs of interest. We must watch out for and stop our children from being led by adult assumptions and biases, both implicit and explicit, to subject matter learning that pushes them into gender stereotyped jobs or careers. And thirdly, we must make ourselves visible and undeniable. We must learn to leverage informal networks, make friends with writers and journalists, become comfortable with writing so we can share our insights and experiences, learn to brand our work, build and support formal mentorship, allyship, and nurturing relationships that support excellence and skill acquisition for women in leadership. Join organizations and committees that appreciate, nurture, elevate, and amplify women and their work. Yes, become social media savvy. Leverage this tool for increased awareness of what I call the cement ceiling. An enlarged digital footprint and outreach means women can lend support across the globe, even when borders are closed. All of these actions can be started right now. There is no better time than now. Please also remember that overlapping social identities, such as a person's race, gender, age, ethnicity, religion, social class, sexual orientation, or disability status, can cause further obstructions to success. Act by looking through this diversity and inclusion lens. It will add boundless power and possibilities. Thank you. The others can be read in my top 10 list.
Thank you so much, Dr. Hemans. I couldn't have said it better, and I know you struggled to find only 3. We know that the issues are complex, and we know that the pay gap is complex. There's no single cause, and therefore there's no single solution. And as we have improved representation of women in medicine, achieving better representation in leadership, and achieving equity in compensation is an issue of basic fairness, but it goes far beyond that. It goes far beyond what is fair to what is the best for society and what is the best for patients. We know that patient outcomes are improved by diversity amongst physicians. We know that research is improved by diversity amongst researchers. We know that progress is improved when we allow all of the population to be part of driving us forward, as opposed to just half. I credit Dr. Cohen with reminding us how far ahead some of the other countries are and how we are light years behind. I would have said, in fact, that the best time to start this work was yesterday. Today is the second best time. Amongst the things that we're recommending at the OMA is, as you said, Dr. Hemans, encouraging greater representation of female physicians in medical leadership positions, working towards greater pay equity across specialties and within specialties, modernizing the fee schedule and the payment models. Unfortunately, the fee schedule is such that it does tend to prioritize procedures over time spent. It tends to prioritize actions over relationships. And we know that as more and more people are struggling with multiple complex comorbidities, and more people are struggling with mental and psychological challenges, those aren't the kinds of care that give the best results. We need to study the issue of gender bias, particularly as it is used in referrals to specialists. There are a variety of different ways that this can be tackled, but we need to understand it better. And as Dr. Lazar advocated for, expanded parental leave benefits for both genders. With that, I'm going to transition us to the media Q&A portion of this talk. So thank you again, Drs. Herman and Lazar. I'm going to hand the mic over, as they say, to Ryan Joyce, Account Director from OMA Communications, to field the questions and let us know who will be answering them. Thanks, Ryan.
Hello. So our first question today I'm going to ask Dr. Hemans to answer is, do we need more women in medicine today?
Thank you for that question. I would say that's actually the wrong question to ask. I think the question shouldn't be, do we need more women in medicine? I think is, how do we utilize the talents of all the women that we have? How do we equalize, or at least bring an equity lens to the playing field, so that all these women with all their talents and their aspirations and their unique, if you want, cognitive diversities can bring the richness to the conversation and to the table. When we elevate women, we elevate everyone. The women are there with the talents, prepared to act on and improve care on many levels. So I don't think it's a matter of numbers. It's a matter of utilizing the talents that are currently right there, right now.
Thank you, Dr. Hemans. My next question that I will ask Dr. Lazar to answer is there a gender pay gap because women bill too low, or is it because men bill too much?
Thank you. I can see how that would be sort of, the obvious answer as to where the gender pay gap comes from. But as both of my colleagues have alluded to, it's much more complex than that. So we know that in the fee schedule, I can speak to myself as a family physician, certain procedures and certain appointment types are remunerated less so than others. So like certain procedures are typically done more so by men, whereas time spent with a patient on psychosocial issues is not remunerated to the same degree. So even though women and female and male physicians might be working the same number of hours, they're not going to be making the same amount, because women physicians are often asked to take much more on that are unpaid or not paid as well, volunteer jobs, sitting on committees, that kind of thing, and just the nature of the types of relationships that they have more so than their male counterparts. And that is a good part of what contributes to the pay inequity, but it's still much more complex than that.
Thank you, Dr.
May I add to that, Ryan?
Yes, of course.
Thank you. So Dr. Lazar has made the point excellently. I want to put that into an example for some of the media journalists here who might not understand what that looks like for a physician. We regularly see that when given the option of who to refer a patient to, patients who are more complicated, patients who will need more time, are referred to women because the referring doctor knows that that woman will take the time to spend with the patient, as opposed to patients who just need a quick in and out for procedure done will often be referred to the men because they're known to be efficient or fast. And it's a self-reinforcing discussion, because the more we give certain types of patients and certain types of demands to women, the more women will continue to fill that, because all of us, whether we're men or women, take our jobs very seriously. And we all do what's right for the patient. And none of us are going to skimp on seeing a patient to be able to bill more. And none of us are going to rush through important conversations for financial reasons. And so I would agree with Dr. Lazar. It's not a question of someone billing too low or someone billing too much. It's a question of valuing the work done, no matter who it's done by.
Thank you, Dr. Hill and Dr. Lazar. The next question is, I'd actually like to ask Dr. Lazar to answer this one as well. Is there a gender gap because female doctors work fewer hours than men, or because of family responsibilities?
Certainly that's part of it. We know that, certainly the pandemic has highlighted this, the women sort of, taking on more of the home responsibilities compared to men, but this existed before the pandemic. But if you if you take those factors into account, and if you level the playing field to have a group of positions where both female and male positions work the same number of hours per week, we still see these inequities. So it's not just about number of hours worked, as Dr. Hill spoke about, it's about value for the quality of work that we do.
Thank you again, Dr. Lazar.
Can I add to that?
Yes, of course, Dr. Hemans.
I would also say there is an expectation in society that it's going to be our job. So right from the get-go, as I mentioned earlier, women are viewed more differently when there is an issue of, I'd say, work-life conflict. And there's an expectation that it will be the woman that will take the time off to do more child-related care, in addition to what I call the second shift, which is the work that is unpaid, which adds up to approximately 10 plus hours per week, often, with the extra home sort of housekeeping duties. So if in fact we were able to remove some of that societal expectation and allow individuals to work for what best suits their family, we wouldn't have this issue. But just on top of that is the issue that men already are making more money. So if you're going to be efficient, you're going to say, well, since you make more money anyway, you might as well continue to work. Since I make less, I will take this on and continue to make less throughout my lifetime. And if you take medicine out of the this particular argument and just look at women in the workforce, that has a lifetime disadvantage to most women, because it means that they're making less money, correcting less social benefits, and have less saved for retirement. It's a real snowballing effect downstream. Thank you.
Thank
May
you.
I add as well, Ryan?
Yes, of course, Dr. Hill.
Thanks. I don't want the answer to get lost in the layers of complexity that we have in this. The question was, is the gap because women work fewer hours than men? And the answer is no, just simply no. We have the data to show that that gap persists after you account for hours worked. So that question becomes, why do we have that gap? And it's because we don't pay physicians by the hour. We pay physicians in a variety of really complicated ways, but that value and prioritize different things. Women get referrals that pay less. Women are encouraged to do procedures that pay less. And women patients wind up having more complex issues that require more time. And so it's just very simply, no, it's not a question of fewer hours. It's a question of the pay structure and what we decide we're valuing as society.
Thank you, Dr. Hill. The next question in the chat box is, how can men help close the pay gap and gaps in leadership? Are we saying men need to take a pay cut? And I'd like to ask Dr. Hill to answer that question.
Excellent. I suspect you'll have all three of us wanting to respond to that one again, but I'll start. No, we're not saying anyone needs to take a pay cut. We're saying we need to value people equitably and equally. When we ask how men can help close the pay gap and the gaps in leadership, the first thing is this: having these conversations, acknowledging that it exists, not arguing about it being a result of choices that women make, which is what I hear the most often, but acknowledging the systemic and the societal influences that encourage and in fact require this pay gap. The second thing is about lifting others with you. And I credit Kim Tran with this, who did an equity session for us a while back. But she said that one of the best things you can do, particularly in this era of Zoom, is invite someone with you to all of these talks and all of these conferences and give them opportunities they wouldn't have otherwise had. And then the third thing I would like to say about this is, with respect to gaps in leadership, it's amazing how much of a difference it makes when someone reaches out and taps a woman on the shoulder. This is true across the board, but men, look for those positions. Look for places where you think there is a female that you can say, you'd be really good at this, and then tell her, because that will encourage them to apply. It'll let them know that they have the backing, and it'll go a long way towards changing the leadership structures.
Thank you, Dr. Hill. I'll invite Dr. Lazar to make a comment on that as well, if you'd like to.
Yes, thank you. So this is interesting, and then there's been lots talked about recently in the literature about this, and how we can encourage more women and support women in leadership roles. We talk about this concept of imposter syndrome, which is much more common in men, and it's much more common in trainees. Sorry, much more common in women and much more common in trainees. So imposter syndrome is being fearful that you're going to be outed as an imposter. So we go through years and years of medical training, time spent in medical school and residency training to become, so-called experts in our field, but yet many of us still feel internally that we're not experts and that somebody's gonna, find us out for being a fraud. Much more common in women and in younger physicians than in men. So that's part of it, is that it largely it can be influenced by, just the societal gender norms and the broader societal structures that influence this, but it's also an internal thing. It begins really in medical training. So women physicians are encouraged and sort of nudged to enter what we call the pink collar tier specialties like psychiatry, like family medicine, like pediatrics, which tend to earn less compared to the other specialties. And it's because of this belief by our supervisors and by faculty that women want these family-friendly lifestyle specialties. We need to allow trainees to explore all options, and we need to support them to make whatever choice they want without assuming that they want to choose a family-friendly specialty. We also need allies and sponsors in our male leadership. So to have our male leadership not to be afraid to mentor a female trainee. And as trainees and young physicians early in our careers, we need to look not only to female mentors, but also to male mentors for those opportunities. And lastly, in terms of, being on boards and hiring committees and that sort of thing, we do need equal representation of women and men. A lot of jobs are done through these informal networks and mentorships. So women need to advocate for themselves and be present on these search committees and panels to allow for equal opportunity in hiring practices.
Thank you, Dr. Lazar. I'd like to also invite Dr. Hemans to answer that question, if you would like to.
Thank you. Dr. Hill and Dr. Lazar have done a fabulous job in, I think, detailing much of my thoughts. I should also note there was a paper done by Dr. Shannon Rizicki either in around 2018, and it looked at just this question. And what they determined was that senior women, trainees of both sexes, or any sex other than a senior man, felt that there was lots of work left to do, but senior male physicians in leadership thought that they were doing a fabulous job with improving equity just by virtue of the number of women that were on staff. And this was in an internal medicine department. And when they asked them questions that came to that conclusion, they recognized that they simply were unable to perceive that numbers did not necessarily equal equity. So it was interesting again. So senior women, all the trainees and the early career physicians and junior women totally could see that. And that's the blindness, that's the blind spot that's out there. And many of them were uncomfortable with even speaking about it and thought they would just wait it out, that they would wait for these senior male physicians with this perspective to sort of retire. But we recognize that that may not work, because these same individuals were mentoring other people and who already succeeded. So I honestly think it's the idea about building these formal mentorships and sponsorships and nurturing relationships that will make a difference. It is about tapping women to come to visit and be a part of meetings so they recognize what goes on. It's about making sure that men are also brought up at the same time to recognize that parenting requires two at least individuals, and that it's okay to take time off. Like, in other words, normalize the idea of parental leave so that both women and men can take the time off and allow women to continue to succeed at work without feeling that they have to necessarily take this time outside of what they need to biologically sort of repair. So I think it's called changing societal perspectives, and that just takes a will, a time, and a plan.
Thank you, Dr. Hemans. Moving on to the next question. Can you elaborate more on how the gap in medicine in Ontario compares to that in other jurisdictions or other countries? Dr. Lazar, can you answer that question?
I think, the research that I've been looking at is mostly based in the US and Canada. We can speak from personal experience with respect to our fee schedule, and don't have quite as great a comprehension of how physicians get paid, but it is different in other countries. So I can't really speak to other developing countries. I know in the US, the problems are similar, the problems that I spoke about in terms of paid parental leave, and women still taking on typically more complex patients, fewer procedures, and more psychosocially complex patients. That also rings true in the United States, but I can't speak to other developing countries or countries outside of Canada or the US.
Thank you, Dr. Lazar. Dr. Hill, do you want to add to that?
Thanks. So if we look at parity and gender parity globally, it stands at around 69%. There's no country in the world where men spend the same amount of time on unpaid work as women do. And in the countries where that ratio is lowest, it's still about 2 to 1. And while the Canadian government is really taking some great steps to try and address this broadly, if you look at it by regions, Western Europe has probably made the greatest progress on it, standing at 77%, whereas the poorest regions, or the ones that are doing the worst, are around 61%, and that's the Middle East and North Africa. North America stands at 73%, and if it continues at the same trend as it's currently going, it will be 151 years until gender parity happens in America. And so that's part of why we talk about it so vocally once we start looking at it, is because the differences are quite dramatic. If you look at the study, it was an international study by Medscape, which looked at primary care physicians across a few different countries, including the United States, the United Kingdom, Germany, France, I think Brazil and Mexico. They all reported very similar gender pay gaps, with females making 20 to 30% less than their male colleagues. And that gap actually was even wider amongst specialists, being from 20 to almost 50% in Germany. And so it really is an issue. It is an issue across countries. It's an issue across societies. And the inequities that start at the very beginning of the medical career can have a lifetime impact of about $2.5 million over a 30-year career. So this is why we're so strongly spoken about this topic. And if you look at the idea that it's value for work and value for time and value for outcomes, you can see that there are a lot of places where we can improve how we choose to pay people and what we value.
Thank you, Dr. Hill. The next question is directed at Dr. Hemans. You mentioned that you had other suggested action items. Can you share your remaining recommendations?
I can. I'm just going to go there. So I have 10, and they are, I'll start with one of these. We need to, for example, demand transparency in job descriptions and remuneration, because we know when that happens, just almost miraculously, some of that gap disappears. When your neighbor, down the hall, who has the same job as you, and same job description, knows what you're making, they are going to probably be making sure that it's around the same as what they're making. And so transparency in remuneration and descriptions are important. The other few are making sure we assert that all staff be onboarded everywhere, not just in hospitals, with a minimum standard of implicit bias training and awareness to try to alleviate the I didn't know, oh, I didn't understand. So some of the more blatantly misogynistic, racist affronts and some of the sexual discrimination, make sure that everybody is onboarded with some minimal expectations. We've talked about pressing ahead for fair and equitable job work compensation. And so we've spent some time on that. We talked about putting women on governance and search committees, and because direction or governance work is crucial to changing some of this. And we know that when specialties become feminized, they become fiscally devalued. What does that mean? It means the more often that women are a large part of a particular specialty, the less they make overall. We talked about fighting against the pinpointing, but we have to talk about measuring and reporting data around the lack of women as clinical chiefs of departments, corporate division heads, and as equally paid leaders in every other clinical and administrative medical setting. Because lack of transparency leads to these old, comfortable, non-diverse leadership models, otherwise known as, some people call it organizational preferentialism. That's where you just tap the most convenient person or one that you know will do a good job. That needs to be measured and reported because that builds accountability. We talked about learning to leverage networks and building formal relationships. And some might consider this controversial, but I don't. I say we have to advocate for what I call a deliberate rebalance of the roles and positions where women are currently unfairly absent. Data has indicated that the waiting for voluntary steps to rebalance these gender inequities and power, they just don't work. Exposing privilege and patriarchy, and people hate the word patriarchy, but really it's just a term. But when you expose it, when you talk about it, it helps to debunk this myth of meritocracy. I can't tell you how many times I've heard there's no women here on this committee in this position because nobody applied. The question is, how did that happen? And what are our responsibilities for doing that? And you got to find allies from everywhere to help you with that. Those are some of the main ones. And I should say, when I talk about finding places to gain excellence and for formal mentorship experience and training, we're talking about examples like the Federation of Medical Women, Ontario Medical Associations, OMA Women, the Canadian Women in Medicine, and places like The Raft, that's led by Dr. Mumta Gautam. And that's because when you go there, you're going there with a specific outcome in mind. And that's to understand how to lead, how to leverage relationships, all of those things that you may not be able to find elsewhere. You get it done there, you put the time in, you're going to feel more confident, and you will make a plan for success.
Thank you, Dr. Hemans. The next question in the chat is, shouldn't the fee schedule recognize the value of psychosocial time spent with patients as well as time spent writing prescriptions and performing procedures? Dr. Hill, can you answer that one?
Shortest answer ever, yes, it should. If I was going to elaborate on that, I would say physicians are compensated in a way that attempts to use evidence around improving outcomes while at the same time being fiscally responsible to a social single payer system. But the fee schedule hasn't been properly rejigged, renovated in at least a decade, and possibly really even that. And the truth of the matter is that technology has advanced and science has advanced. And that has meant that procedural things have become faster. And so where initially it might have been equitably paid for time, you can increase the speed with which you do a certain procedure as you have better tools, as you have better science to make things easier. but you can't increase the speed with which you form relationships, and you can't increase the speed with which you counsel patients. And we need to find a way to validate and value all of those activities, because if you ask patients, they're equally grateful for the care that is psychosocial, for lack of a better way of phrasing it, and for the care that is procedural.
Thank you, Dr. Hill. The next question, I imagine all three of you would have something to say. Have you seen any advancement on gender pay issues since you became a doctor? I'll start with Dr. Lazar.
So I've been in practice for about 6 years now, so maybe on the kind of lower side compared to some of my colleagues, and I haven't really seen any advancement personally. We're just starting. The OMA is starting to look at updating the fee schedule, modernizing it. So I imagine hopefully in the next year or two we will begin to see some of that. I can tell you from personal experience, the number of committees that I sit on, meetings that I attend, research projects that I do that are all completely unpaid hasn't changed in terms of, over the for those things. And I do them totally willingly and just because I'm passionate about them. So but I think, the issue of physician pay, the general public doesn't care so much about, absolute dollars and cents in terms of how much physicians make. We're definitely highly privileged, and we have lots of power, and we need to be mindful of that. It's just, from my perspective, it's an issue of valuing the work that women physicians and women in general, not just physicians, that all women do. It's a matter of money being equal to value, and showing women and women physicians that we value the work that women physicians do. The federal government just, this week acknowledged that the pandemic has caused what's been referred to as a she session, when women have been taking on more of the home-based tasks than men, and have made a commitment in their economic repair plan to include women and to not leave them out of the workforce. So this is really, for me, it's a greater issue of progress for equal rights and valuing the work that women do, and it's not simply just dollars and cents. That's a long way of saying no. I haven't seen any change.
Thank you, Dr. Lazar. I'll invite Dr. Hemans to answer this question if you'd like.
I think Dr. Lazar has done an amazing job in capturing much of the nuances behind this. I've been in practice, I won't say, a lot longer. And I would suggest, and you can see it because we have the data, we just captured the data both from the Ontario Medical Association and from Cohen and Turan. I can honestly say that there hasn't been a huge change. There has been a change in our income just based on the various political negotiations that have gone on over the years. There has been a change in the way we do our practice based on various options for practice models. But when you look at whether or not it makes a difference whether you're male and man or woman in medicine, and whether or not they sort of compensate you for the differences in the type of and the way you practice, the answer is no. But am I complaining about that? I'm not complaining about the fact that I am privileged to care for patients. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about, literally at this point, talking about compensation. And there hasn't been a large difference in accepting and acknowledging and compensating women for the different types of skills that they bring to a practice, just by the nature of maybe part of it's by the nature of what we tend to fall into. We do a lot of family practice, a lot of psychiatry, a lot of peds. That's a lot of hands-on and sort of family dynamics, understanding it in order to have a better outcome. And we can go back and forth about, the fact that women do tend to do better on interviews, therefore we have more emotional intelligence, et cetera, communication skills. But I think it's more than that. I think it's about the reality. Just in answering the question, the answer is no. There hasn't been a large change in that respect. but there has been improvement over time in general for the medicine community.
Thank you, Dr. Hemans. I'm going to ask Dr. Hill to answer it as well, and I'll just remind the attendees what the question was. It's, have you seen any advancement on gender pay issues since you became a doctor?
So my duration of practice is in between Dr. Lazar's and Dr. Hemans. But with that said, I'm actually going to take a little bit of a different bent and say I have seen some advancement. And the advancement that I've seen is that we're talking about it, which is the real first step, and it is huge. I remember when I was a medical student, I matched to cardiac surgery without having any idea what my income or what my billings would later be. It wasn't something we talked about. It wasn't something that we were encouraged to. And I was discouraged from going into cardiac surgery because, as the person who I spoke with at the time said, but you're going to want a family someday. And those were the exact words, and it wasn't that long ago. So it is very much still an issue, but there is advancement happening because we're having the conversation, because we're seeing places like the Ontario Medical Association take it on as real and meaningful. It has stepped out from the fringes and it's starting to become part of the main conversations that we're having. And more people are aware of it. We have a long ways to go yet. The recently published payment list or billings list demonstrated that of the top billers, very few were female, certainly a disproportionately smaller number. And if you look at any given specialty, you can see that same dynamic play out. It is not just that women are in lower specialties for one reason or another, whether they're encouraged, forced, or choose it voluntarily. It's also that within a given specialty, women generally make less and are able to bill less. And that is a very complicated question around, again, referrals and tasks performed and the fee-for-service schedule.
Thank you, Dr. Hill. The next question is directed at Dr. Hemans. You mentioned the importance of diversity, and we know diversity encompasses more than age, gender, race. It includes lived experience as well. Can you speak a little bit more about this?
That's a good, you know what, that's a very poignant notion. And it's important to note that that's absolutely correct. Just because an individual comes from a certain geographic area doesn't mean that everybody in that area, for example, has a similar experience. What this question doesn't talk about, though, is how you value that lived experience. What I have noticed is when you are applying for certain things, if they tell you right up front that they are interested in your lived experience, and they value what you bring to the table, where hopefully decisions are made, it gives you an opportunity to highlight that. The fact that I've been on a, like for example, I may have lived on the streets. I may have lived on the streets, learned a lot from that, gathered my bearings, got myself up, tied my bootstrings, and went on and done some work that got me from point A to point B, and here I am. That's what happened with the second cup, for example. Or I could have been a person that learned a lot of stuff in school, and I have a lot of enthusiasm, and I'm ready to get out there and work. There is nothing wrong with either of those. It's about valuing those. There's a term, cognitive diversity, comes in here. And what that means is appreciating what people bring to the table, and how that intersection of all of that can add to the richness and the layering of understanding that improves outcomes and improves the ability to build coalitions and engagement. So I do think it's important. I think understanding what diversity means to you is important. Understanding what you're looking for when you use that language and where you hope to go with that is important. And I think being open with that is important. And I think accepting that it's there, and somehow I really do think this is important, somehow acknowledging and ranking it in some way or form, for example, on search committees or on boards, is also important. And I'll leave it at that for now.
Thank you, Dr. Hemans. So that concludes our Q&A portion. I want to thank everyone for their questions. And now I'd like to turn it over to Dr. Hill to provide concluding remarks.
Thank you so much, Ryan, and thank you everyone who's joined us today. If we were unable to get to your questions, please feel free to follow up with the media team at media@oma.org with additional requests for information or for interviews with any of the panelists. We'll also have a recording of the session available later this afternoon, as is our usual. I hope this session was helpful in informing your reporting. I thank you again for your very thoughtful questions, and I always look forward to watching and reading your coverage. Thank you so much for your time, for your interest, and for your activities. Stay safe, stay healthy. See you next time.